Summer Fun with Acey and Christi. Chapter 5. Trouble Goes to Camp. The Bible says in Proverbs chapter 23 verse 17, "Let not thine heart envy sinners." Proverbs chapter 23 verse 17. Christi and her parents had just arrived to pick up Susie's Self-Will. The girls and several other friends were going to church camp. As Mr. Lovejoy and Christi walked up to Susie's door, a man's voice seemed to boom from behind it. "Take this money and get out of here." The two looked at each other in surprise. Then Susie bounced out the door. She was stuffing some money into her new pocketbook and smiling as if nothing had happened. "Hi, I'm ready," she said. Christi was puzzled, but she picked up the happy tone and replied, "Okay, away we go." While they loaded Susie's suitcase into the trunk of the car, Christi noticed tears in Susie's eyes. Had Susie's stepfather said other hurtful things to her? Christi's heart ached for her friend. Silently she prayed for the day when Susie's family could be as happy as her family. Soon, Mr. and Mrs. Lovejoy, Christi and Susie arrived at the church parking lot, and all the sadness seemed to be put aside. Christi had never seen so many of her friends gathered to go on a trip. In fact, this was the first time most of the gang had gone to church camp. Their fathers loaded all the suitcases and bags onto the bus as Christi and her friends talked and ran about excitedly. Acey, Racer, Pudge, J. Michael, Sandy, Bill, Booker, Reginald and Happy were all there, as well as Miriam and her cousin Mitchie. Mitchie had come for a summer visit and was going to church camp too. Christi just knew she was going to like Mitchie. Mitchie's big, brown, beautiful eyes and shy smile, as bright as sunshine, seemed to say, "Let's be friends." Christi was glad her friends would be with her at church camp, but she was also pleased to see that Miss Content, Mr. Franson, and Mr. and Mrs. Virtueson were going too. What a trip this was going to be! Everyone was laughing and talking as they climbed into the bus and found their seats. "Grab your pillow," Bill called to Booker. "We have the cooler," shouted Racer and Acey. "Let's not forget the snacks," reminded Pudge. At last, all were ready for the happiest ride of the summer. After Mr. Virtueson led in prayer, he slipped behind the wheel of the bus. Christi was as excited as everyone else, until the old bus groaned and started to roll slowly away from the church parking lot. Then, as she waved goodbye to her father and mother, she suddenly had a lump in her throat that felt as big as a baseball. She wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. She had never long before gone away from home for so long. As the bus turned onto the highway, Racer started singing, and the rest of Christi's friends joined in and sang along. "My Lord knows the way through the wilderness, all I have to do is follow." Christi was very pleased to notice that even Susie had picked up on the words of the song and was singing almost as loudly as Pudge and Bill. Christi hoped this week at church camp would be a happy one, especially for Susie. The bus bumped over hills and through valleys, following curves around little towns. The sun shone through the window, and soon the songs faded away. Heads began to bob sleepily. The trip was still fun, but quieter fun. Christi looked at Susie sitting next to her on the same seat. She was beginning to nod off to sleep. Christi prayed that Susie, especially, would enjoy the week at church camp. She knew Susie was not as happy as she pretended. It was true that Susie acted mean at times, but perhaps Susie just needed to know that God loved her. One way to help Susie understand God's love was to be a friend to Susie. As the miles rolled on and the minutes ticked into hours, the tires of the bus hummed their own happy tune. The big yellow bus swayed back and forth, gently rocking the sleeping travellers. Pudge was the first to wake up. He quietly asked Mr. Virtueson, "Can we please stop soon? I'm thirsty." A cheer of agreement came up from Reginald and Bill and that woke up everyone. Soon Mr. Virchuson pulled the bus into a large truck stop with a gas station, cafe, and gift shop. Being gentlemen, the boys let the girls get off first. Even thirsty Pudge was willing to wait for the young ladies to go first. Booker and Happy remained outside the bus and watched Mr. Virchuson pump gasoline. Most of the others were interested in stretching their legs and getting some exercise by walking around the gift shop. It was fun to see all the neat and interesting things, but they just looked. They were all saving their hard-earned spending money for the week at camp. All that is, except Susie. Pushing into line to pay for her drink, some candy, a bag of chips, a book and a travel game, Susie boasted, "I have so much money, I'll never be able to spend it." And with that, she went out to the bus, leaving the other girls behind. Sandy was shocked by Susie's words and thought to herself, "It took me weeks to earn my spending money for this trip. Why should she brag about how much she has?" Miriam knew Susie's words hurt Mitchie, because Mitchie had no spending money. Why did Susie have to be so rude? Miriam decided she would share what money she had with her cousin. Maybe some of the other girls would do the same. Why didn't Susie think about other people's feelings? As the group filed back onto the bus, it seemed everyone had forgotten what Susie had said, but everyone hadn't forgotten. Mitchie watched Susie reading her book, and she felt angry. Why did Susie have so much money to spend? Susie could buy anything she wanted. Mitchie couldn't buy anything. It wasn't fair, and Mitchie felt very envious. Christi noticed the frown on Mitchie's face and flashed a smile at her. Mitchie remembered that she should be nice to Susie. So she smiled and settled back in her seat. Before they knew it, the bus was stopping again, this time along the highway in a shaded picnic area. In no time at all, some juicy hot dogs were sizzling over a fire. The good smell mixed with the sparks and smoke rising up from the burning wood. Yum, yum, thought the hungry travellers. I'm not sure which smells better, the roasting hot dogs or the burning wood, said Happy. But I do know which will taste better. Right, agreed Mr. Franson. Let's all pitch in and set the table. Mr. Virchuson opened the giant jar of pickles. Mrs. Virchuson and Miss Content dished out the cold potato salad from the cooler, and Christi and Sandy poured tall glasses of ice-cold lemonade. Then they all thanked God for these things he had given them to enjoy. Fixing a second hot dog for himself, Reginald asked, "Pudge, do you want another hot dog?" "I'm not sure," answered Pudge. "Why?" "Oh, I just thought you might want another one, since you have enough mustard on your face for at least one more." "Thanks, I think I will," said Pudge with a smile as he reached for another napkin. Wiping his face, he added, "It's okay to laugh. After all, you're the one wearing ketchup on your top lip." Giggles and laughter again sounded round the picnic tables. It was such fun to be here together with friends. Susie was very clearly having a good time. Even Mitchie laughed out loud. She was feeling part of the group too. While the fire burned out, everyone helped to clean up and to load the bus. Meanwhile, an unseen small visitor, more nosy than wise, sneaked into the bus from one of the overhanging shade trees. This visitor with 4 tiny feet was just playing mostly, but he was sniffing around, hunting for something to eat. Finding a bag of peanuts in J. Michael's backpack, he had lunch too. Like the others at the picnic, his tummy was soon full. Then, deep inside the backpack, he curled up and went to sleep, with his bushy tail covering his face. Returning to the bus, girls first of course, the group looked forward to the end of their trip. "Bless the rest of our trip," prayed Mr. Virchuson as they started out. "Bless the coming week that we may learn to love you more, and bless the boys and girls as they learn of the big surprise. Amen." "Surprise? What surprise?" everyone wanted to know. "If I told you now, it wouldn't be a surprise tomorrow," teased Mr. Virchuson. As the wheels of the bus began to turn, everyone sat back and tried to guess what the surprise would be. It was fun to be together on a bus going to camp. Just talking was fun. Just being together was fun. As everyone chattered about the coming fun of the week ahead, J. Michael happened to look down and notice that his backpack needed zipping. So he zipped it, not knowing what you and I know. Christi, Miriam, Mitchie and Sandy were laughing and talking excitedly when Susie, who had been sitting at the back with Miss Content, noticed that they were having a good time without her. She jumped to her feet, marched up to the middle of the bus and angrily stared at Mitchie. Keeping her voice low so none of the adults could hear her, she whispered meanly, "Get out of that seat. It's mine." Wanting both Susie and Mitchie to feel a part of the fun, Sandy said, "Here, Susie, sit with me. There is plenty of room for all of us. There is always room for one more friend." "Thanks," grumbled Susie as she flopped down next to Sandy. The girls relaxed and Susie's stormy feelings seemed to pass over. Each girl was determined to be as kind to Susie as she could be, even if it wasn't always easy. Mitchie, being new to the group and shy, watched but didn't say anything. Her grandmother had often told her that she could learn more by watching and listening than by talking, so she kept her thoughts to herself and moved back to sit with her cousin Miriam. The young girls kept chattering about all the fun they would have during their week at church camp. "I'm looking forward to the meetings under the big tent, especially the puppet stories," said Miriam excitedly. "I can't wait to see what crafts we make. I want to make something really special for Daddy and Mum," added Christi. "Do you think we'll have a cookout?" asked Sandy. "I'm going to be the first in the swimming pool and the first to hike up the mountain," said Susie. "I'm excited about," began Mitchie. "About what, Mitchie? What are you excited about?" asked Miriam. "I'm excited about my first horseback ride," she explained with a shy smile. "Well," said Sandy, "that does sound like fun, but I'm most interested in the surprise Mr. Virtueson has for us." In the back of the bus, the boys were just as excited as the girls. Each mile brought all of them closer to church camp, and soon they would arrive. Then a great week at camp would begin, and soon a small sleeping visitor would awake. "There it is!" yelled Racer. "I see it too!" shouted Happy. At last they could all read the signs. Mount Olive Bible Camp. Welcome. To the left were the boys' cabins. To the right were the girls' cabins. "Yay, we're here! Now the fun can really start!" squealed Sandy. "Look at all the other kids! There must be a zillion of them," Happy guessed. Needless to say, there weren't quite a zillion people there, but there were busloads and busloads of excited campers. Booker was so eager to start the week at camp that he jumped to his feet along with the other boys before he remembered girls first. "Whoa, we forgot to let the girls go first," he reminded. "Thank you, Booker," said Miriam as she smiled up at him and made her way to the front of the bus. Booker was very glad he had remembered his manners. Mr. Friendson and Mr. Virtueson and all the boys helped unload the bags. They even helped carry the girls' suitcases to the door of their cabin before they headed towards the boys' cabin. The girls had already rushed inside their cabin with Mrs. Virtueson and Miss Content, and in lickety-split time they settled on who would sleep in which bunk. Then, as girls do, they opened their suitcases, made their beds, and had the cabin looking homely. This was before the boys across the road in the boys' cabin had even decided where each boy would bunk. It also took longer in the boys' cabin to settle in, for it seemed that every boy wanted a top bunk. They didn't unpack their suitcases as the girls did either. Instead, they stuffed them under the beds, where the sleeping bags were still rolled up. Without another thought, they headed out the cabin door to get a look around the camp before it got dark. Since the boys hadn't unpacked their suitcases and bags, they hadn't discovered the little visitor in J. Michael's backpack. But it didn't matter. He was content. He had a supper of nuts and went right back to sleep. Later that night, as most of the travellers were sleeping soundly in their bunks, Mitchie woke up to the sound of sniffles coming from the bunk below. Susie was crying. Mrs. Virtuson sat in a chair beside Susie's bunk, trying to comfort her. Mitchie didn't mean to listen, but she did. She really couldn't help hearing. Susie was crying because she was so unhappy at home. Susie missed her real dad and wasn't sure her mother and stepfather really loved her. Suddenly, Mitchie didn't feel angry at Susie anymore. Instead, she felt sorry for her. Mitchie had been wrong to think that Susie was happy just because she had nice clothes and money to spend. Now Mitchie could see things did not make Susie or anyone happy. The more important thing was to be loved. It was far better to have a loving family than a basket full of money. It was better to have friends than to have new clothes. How wrong Mitchie had been. Although Susie had been mean at times, Mitchie had wanted to be like her. All that day Mitchie had been thinking of Susie's pretty clothes and spending money. Mitchie had been jealous of Susie, instead of being thankful for her own loving family and friends. Mitchie rolled over, pulling her pillow tighter around her ears. With the pillow shutting out the other voices, Mitchie was in her own silent little world. She asked God to forgive her for being envious. She thanked God for her wonderful family. And then Mitchie asked God to show Susie how much he loved her. Also, Mitchie asked God to help her to be kind to Susie. As the moon moved across the sky, making way for the coming sun, most of the campers slept peacefully, some even dreaming of the surprise coming tomorrow. The next morning, the mystery visitor in camp woke extra early, had a breakfast of nuts, and began to look for a drink of water.